because I'm so glad that he is joining with us today. And we're going to continue in our May discussion here, our series talking about reflecting the light of Christ. And, the scripture, Jesus tells the disciples and through the disciples, the church, he said, you're the light of the world. And if a city, you're a city set up on a hill that cannot be hid. He equates that that light, that there is a difference. There is a difference that should be seen in us. Have you ever walked into a dark room from being outside in the light, and now all of a sudden, like, your eyes can't process things properly? It's the old story that I think a majority of us have gone through as kids. You're sleeping there, you're trying to go to sleep at night, and you're in that dark room, and now all of a sudden something changes, like the room that you love so much that whenever it gets dark outside and the lights are out and it's time to go to bed, now all of a sudden that coat that's hanging on a hook by your closet all of a sudden starts taking on a form, and you're like, wait a second, I don't remember that monster being there whenever the lights were on. There's something powerful to the concept of light. And it is a scientific fact that light and darkness cannot exist within the same space, right? And darkness will only exist in the absence of light, right? Light does not exist in the absence of darkness. Y'all will get that in a little bit. You'll figure it out, what I'm saying. I'm not trying to go 42 levels deep right off the bat. I know some of you are on the first cup of coffee, as am I. But for darkness to exist, it requires that light not be present. All light has to do to change the situation is show up. And so if we're looking at this concept of we are reflecting the light of Christ, we recognize that we are not the light within ourselves, but it is His light reflected through our lives that makes a difference in the darkness of this world. How many's ever gone through a day where I'm going to go ahead and do it, even though I hate this mentality. Let's say it's a Monday. And as soon as I say that, you're just like, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. I've had one of those. You're going through a Monday, and it's a Monday all day long. You know what I mean? Like, you go out to go to work in the morning, you got a flat tire that you didn't know you were going to have, so now you got to change it. And you get the tire changed, and then you go to crank it up, and you recognize that something's wrong with your battery. The battery, you left a light or something on inside, and now the battery's just so you got to, you know what I mean? It's just everything that seems to possibly that could go wrong does go wrong, right? Have you ever been in one of those types of seasons in your life, whether it's a day, a week, a month, whatever it may be, and somebody comes along and just interjects into that a difference? Some interaction that you have. Somebody, it may be a conversation in a grocery store that they just, for some reason, tell you, everything's going to be all right. You're going to be okay. Or you walk in and they say, you look great today. And all of a sudden it's like, man, I wasn't feeling good, but now I'm feeling pretty good. What changed? Somebody decided to shine a little light in your direction. And that, all I'm talking about there is just the human psychological element of that, right? But when we're talking about the light of Christ, there are elements to His character that if we allow those to be displayed through our lives, it makes an even greater effect and difference in the lives of others. And today we're going to put our focus on the character trait of forgiveness exhibited by Christ, and how that us forgiving others will transform our relationships, and in doing so reflect the forgiveness that He has given to us. And I'm hoping here today that we can really highlight some practical traits, some practical steps that will help us to be more forgiving. Because I can promise you, the more forgiving you become, the more like Christ you become, right? So, since this is somewhat of a Bible study, let's go ahead. It would help if we go to the Word. Let's go to Matthew chapter 18. Very familiar conversation for most. Peter and Jesus are having a talk about forgiveness. And let's be honest, Peter's looking for a loophole. Somewhere in Peter's life, he's been hurt. He's been maligned. Somebody's done him wrong. Well, how do you know that, Pastor? Because it's happened to us all. And Peter comes to him and he says, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? He didn't say just anybody. He said my brother. You got to wonder if Andrew's sitting there going, dude, what are you doing, man? Why you throw me under the bus, Doc? He says, how many times can my brother sin against me and I forgive him? And then he gives Jesus a suggestion. How does 7 times sound? And he thinks he is being so gracious. And so, I mean, think about it. If I walked up to you and I slapped you across the face, some of y'all just got riled up right there. As soon as I said that, Brother Bradley went, what? Excuse me? I walk up and slap you across the face, and you say, you know what? I forgive you for that. And I haul off and slap you again. And you're feeling extra gracious that day. And you say, you know what? I forgive you for that too. By the time we get to number 6, you're about at the end of your rope. And think about it. In that context, how gracious, how forgiving have you been with me? I mean, my Lord, you come to this church and that pastor's just up there slapping people. I don't understand this. Think about it. You're telling the story later. I was at a church today and the pastor slapped this dude and this guy let him slap him 7 times. And you're like, never happened to me. So Peter thinks he is being so gracious. Lord, he sins against me. How many times I got to forgive him? 7? 7's like, oh. He's waiting for Jesus to go, let me pat you on the back. Man, how gracious and how wonderful. What's Jesus say? I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. So take your little 7 and let's make that 490. I mean, you don't even have that right side of your face intact anymore. 400, you don't even have teeth. That's right, Brother Paul. 490 times. But look at what Paul writes to the church at Ephesus in Ephesians 4:31 and 32. He says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice, and be ye kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. So he sets that example. Jesus tells Peter 490 times. And Paul, writing to the church, says, let's even take it a little further than that. Let's take it to the extreme level of the fact that you have been forgiven of all of your sins, and now you should forgive others in the same fashion. So, it's that element that really kind of brings it home to us. And it's recognizing that our response to others and our willingness to forgive is not based upon how we were brought up. It's not based upon how our day's going that day. It's not about even a certain number of times that someone has forgiven us. The basis for this and the foundation is, as you have been forgiven, so forgive. And so, in looking at that, I want to start out, and I'm going to go with you first, because I don't want Brother Rick. I want him to like me, and so I want to have him start this thing off. How has experiencing God's forgiveness changed your approach when it comes to forgiving others?
Well, I think the difference in us is right there in the question, experiencing God's forgiveness. That's what makes us different than Joe Schmo at Walmart. That's why there's so much anger in the world today. I mean, you take somebody's parking spot and they're liable to shoot you. And we would have thought that was a joke, but now it's in the news all the time. There's just so much anger. I mean, we were appalled back in the 80s when parents were fighting over Cabbage Patch Kids in the toy store. We were just like, I can't believe they're doing that. Now they fight over, they'll shoot you over something that's so small. There's just so much anger. But the difference is we've experienced his forgiveness.
Right.
And because he has forgiven us so much, we don't have any right to hold on to anger.
Right.
And I know that's easier said than done, and that's what we're going to talk about later on. But because of that, every time I don't want to forgive somebody, I have to remember what I've been forgiven of.
And so, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think a lot of what you're talking about is because of what we've experienced, there has to be a change of our perspective, right?
That's it, yes.
It's to whom much is given, much is required.
Right. Because of what we've experienced, it lies more heavily on us to forgive than the average person out there who hasn't experienced this love.
Brother Rick, what you got? I don't know if it's worse making you follow her or making you go before her. So go ahead, bro. Oh, there you go. You're good to go.
I must say I admire the freedom and liberty having to be up here that you guys are able to run and flow with these things.
You're good, bro. What you got?
For me, it's identifying what puts us in a position to feeling like we have to forgive or forgive somebody, and
Right.
it usually boils down to hurt or lack of acceptance. And that manifests to many emotions, whether it's anger, wrath, depression, and things of that nature. So usually we're, hurt or not accepted.
Right.
Reflecting back on the unforgiving servant, I think about it in the context that I will forever owe God more than any person could ever owe me.
Ooh, that's good.
When I think of the context of life and the fact that I exist and live, which I still can't get my head wrapped around.
I know what you mean.
It puts it in the prospect that this life is a gift from God, and it's His to give and take, and to think what God had put Himself through for myself, mankind, to be with Him. Then it puts the trials in as a gift themselves, and it can be turned into a blessing. So that's what I reflect on that passage.
Sure, and I think that is I think that's a phenomenal way of looking at that, because we have been given something that is beyond our own comprehension. Because we are forgiven, we forgive. Brother Greg.
If I can be transparent for a moment.
No,
I'm
sorry, I can't help it. Go ahead, bro.
I got baptized very early. I received the Holy Ghost very early. And growing up in church, it was very hard for me to understand forgiveness. And I was also very cocky and very self-absorbed.
Okay.
I was very critical of people, because I played instruments and sang. If somebody wasn't exactly on beat or on key, I was very, very, very derogatory. Then I left God and got into a lot of things that I'm not going to get into today.
Sure.
But after going to jail, dealing with drugs and alcohol, stealing things from people, since I've come back to God, it's changed my whole thought process about how I feel about people.
Right.
It was just, but it was, and I can't imagine somebody who's never experienced that, how they can, how you guys can relate. Somebody that's lived for God all this time, because it's very hard. It was very hard for me.
Absolutely. You brought up something about just kind of the level of anger of people in our world today. It can be shocking when you're not kind of prepared for the chaos that you're about to walk out into. I mean, if you think you think everybody is just all sunshine and rainbows, just go to a Black Friday sale once, right? Just go to something where you got to stand in a line. You know, I mean, it just starts getting chaotic. I mean, you knew this was going to come up, right? You knew this was going to come up. But Anthony and I were picking up some material for a job we were doing in North Carolina, and this gentleman, this older gentleman, was getting into his truck beside of us. We're in the parking lot. I walked past him, and I thought everything's fine. And just how you doing? And got in my vehicle, and I got in mine, and he's getting in his. Well, when he closes his door, he's right here on this side. I started backing out, right? His door closed. All right, give me room to get out. So I start backing out. You ever seen a look on somebody's face and been able to read their lips and just know they're cussing you up? And okay. Out of nowhere. I mean, this gentleman is telling me all the things. And I don't know. It took me so by surprise at the level of anger, and I didn't know what I had done. I rolled down the window, and he's sitting over here in the passenger seat going, "Oh, don't do it, don't do it." I said, "No." I rolled down the window. I said, "Sir, are you okay? Is everything all right? What's going on?" He said, "You just need to get on back to Virginia where you come from." I said, "Well, would it surprise you to know I come from around here?" He said, "Well, you sure don't act like it." I don't know what I did. I smiled to the man. I said hi as I'm getting in my vehicle. Just that anger, right? And it can be startling sometimes when somebody comes at us from whatever it is that's going on in their life. And that's why I was legitimately asking, are you okay? Is there something you need? Like, what's going on? I wasn't trying to pour gasoline on the fire, but I guess I kind of did. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we will always be given plentiful opportunities to display forgiveness. You will never have a lack of opportunities to forgive, right? That's always going to come. And so if that is the case, and this is the world that we're living in, then I think we've got to be prepared, and we've got to be honing that skill. Because if you don't learn how to forgive now, people aren't going to stop offending you tomorrow. People aren't going to stop being angry and ornery tomorrow. Forgiveness is something that is always going to be required of us. And so I think it is important for us to recognize the forgiveness that was given unto us and have that perspective. I don't forgive you because I'm a nice person. There are days that I forgive you that I still may not like you, but I'm going to forgive you. See, I'm going to get where some of us are living today. There are days I don't have to like what you did, and you don't have to tell me you're sorry for me to forgive you. Y'all, I'm about to get on this candy stick. She's starting. That cough means you're going over too much. No. I'm about to get on this because you've heard me say it 100 times before, and we'll say it again. Forgiveness is not about the other person. When I forgive you, if Brother Michael offends me, when I forgive him, I am not forgiving him because I don't want him to walk around feeling bad and all this other kind of stuff. My forgiveness for him is not about him. My forgiveness is me releasing myself from the responsibility of being angry and being hurt and being offended and all that type of stuff. Me forgiving is me saying, I ain't got time to do all that, and I'm not going to hold it against you. Let's go on. So forgiveness is not about that other person. If we make it about the other person, then we're going to walk around holding grudges all the time. Because I don't know if you've noticed this yet or not, but people don't say they're sorry very frequently.
That's right.
Unless it's Sister Lori. She always apologizes before she starts a conversation with me. So I'm sorry. Sister Sherry.
My thing is any offense that happens to me, literally anything, I take the blame myself. I blame myself for whatever happened. So it's not me forgiving other people. I need to learn, number one, to forgive myself, and number two, that it's not always my fault.
Oh, absolutely.
That's where my struggle is.
Right. And you bring up a great point, because sometimes forgiveness is not about the other party. Forgiveness is about me trying to carry around a responsibility that's not mine to carry.
Right.
I mean, how important do I think I am? That I'm the reason why they're mad, or I'm the reason why they did this, that, or the other. It's not about that. And I've got to be willing to forgive myself just as I have been forgiven. I've got to be willing to forgive myself. All right, let's talk about practical steps. Brother Rick, I'm going to go to you first. What practical steps can we take to forgive those who have hurt us? Practical steps. He's laughing already, so here we go.
I think it's about the realization of the situation and communication. There's a psychologist, Alyssa Epple, that studied gazelles for 30 years, just to set the table briefly. Gazelles would eat grass, wag their tail, then there's a lion in the bush. Gazelle takes off, lion's no longer a threat, and goes back to eating grass and wagging its tail. Unlike many other creatures, as humans, we can project the lion is in the bush. Whether it's something somebody said last week or something that happened a year ago.
That's good.
We put ourselves in this situation of fight or flight. And a lot of times when we're triggered, we're being responsive to something that's already happened and not realize the situation that we're in. Like, I'm driving in traffic or whatever. I'm in a safe space, and I'm reacting to something that is not in the moment.
Wow.
So with that, the practical applications is prayer, stepping out of the current emotion, like anger. It's saying like, God, please help me step out of this anger because I'm not in that situation. Shifting the focus, helps me realize the lion's not in the bush, and the reality of the matter. When triggered, we can become hyper-focused and lose reality of the moment. And just distractions. Another practical step, if it's immediate, intermediate, or long-term, is to write down your thoughts and emotions on paper, and don't send it. Don't send it to the other person.
Don't press send on that email.
Yeah. And that will give you time to organize your thoughts and emotions and give yourself time to go away and come back and look at it when you're not triggered in the emotion.
Right.
And then you can analyze if you're being hyper responsive or how you're reacting. So it's, I find that helpful. And one saying, it kind of sticks with me, it's better to spend a night in anger than in remorse, meaning that if you're angry, you probably haven't done something yet. But once you do something or once you say something, you can't really take it back. Right. And then the remorse is, I think anger is like the weather. It passes, in time.
Absolutely.
Maybe it comes back, but remorse, it just kind of sticks there.
Wow. I am so sorry that you have to follow that.
I was sitting here thinking, will you just take an offering and dismiss? Because that was awesome.
That's just it. Go your way and sin no more, right?
Yes.
I mean, there is a scriptural precedent to that. Sister Nanette's got her hand up over here. There is a scripture. Oh, her daughter's got it first. She just played the trump card. She's too close. There is a scriptural precedent to that because the writer of Proverbs says, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, because there is a lion in the streets, then I'm not going to leave my house. It doesn't say the lion's outside my door. Because danger is out there somewhere, then I'm going to change, and I'm going to live like danger is imminent. And I think that is so critical. Just because a lion was in the bush doesn't mean that the lion is right there. Just because it hurt in the moment does not mean that we still have to continue to tie back into that. So good. All right, go.
Well, I'm thinking back to when Jesus said, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive you. And so I was listening to a podcast last night. It was an old message that Brother Tenney had preached, and it was actually on forgiveness. And I didn't intentionally do it for today. It's just, that's how God works. And he said there was this woman, her husband had left her, and she was so angry. And the old preacher was saying, you're going to have to forgive him. In order for you to make it to heaven, you're going to have to forgive him. And she said, but he doesn't deserve to be forgiven. And he said, no, but you do. If we want to make it to heaven, if we want the forgiveness of God, we're going to have to forgive others.
Absolutely.
So his steps that he said is so right. Mm-hmm. Everything that he had said. And I read this psychologist. This is a secular person. This is not a preacher saying this. A psychologist said forgiveness is a decision and healing will follow. We have to forgive. And if we decide I'm going to forgive that person, this may be a process and it may take me a while, but I'm going to forgive, the healing will follow.
Wow. Brother Jacob, make sure that microphone's on for that young lady. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. A practical step would be, and here's the dreaded word, fasting.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially if you're praying and you're praying and you're praying and you just can't let go.
Right.
Fast.
Because fasting is me saying, God, change me.
Yes.
Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. He's going to come grab that. Sister Nanette, we're going to go to you next, and then we're going to move on to, Sister Christy. We're going to go to Sister Christy after Sister Nanette. Go ahead, dear.
Well, something I learned a while back, well, it's been probably 10 years or better, is feelings don't know time, like Brother Rick was talking about.
Right.
So if somebody does something to make you angry or hurts you in some way, that if it's even remotely similar to something else, it stirs up those emotions and they can go back to childhood.
Right.
And so then you're more worked up, but you have to stop and think about where that anger actually came from, and is it really that bad?
Right.
But you also have to know yourself and know your own emotions. For me, especially when it comes to driving, I know when my anger starts getting bad in the car and I start getting road rage, it comes from fear, from my car accident.
Right.
And that fear turns into anger. So you need to forgive people for fear as well as anger, because I had to work on my ex-husband more.
Right.
Because he frightened me.
Right.
And that fear developed into hate. And it was far worse than any anger I've ever experienced.
Sure.
So it was more, I had to forgive that fear in that situation. So you really need to know your own emotions, because one thing triggers another, and you think you're upset about this, and it actually could go to an entirely different thing.
Absolutely. And the thing that I would highlight in what she's bringing up is, if you'll notice, for most of us, all of the issues, and even a lot of what Brother Rick was saying and bringing into what she just said, all of the issues tend to be rooted in emotion. The hurt is rooted in some type of emotional response. And where forgiveness is born is in the choice to move on from it. It's the choice to not be imprisoned in that moment in time, in that emotion. Sister Christy.
I was just going to say, when, like, if we look at us before we came to church, before we started a relationship with God, we depended on people, the same type of people.
Right.
Okay, our negativity, our hurt, our pain was justified.
Right.
Okay, so when we start having a relationship with God, we see that we can talk to our fellow, our husbands, our wives,
Right.
or our friends,
Right.
and they can help us. But also, we have a pastor and a pastor's wife that can help us, because there is times when we have been so hurt that
Right.
for myself, I've had a situation where, like, I felt, like you said, my heart was justified, but are you going to allow it to keep going?
Right.
You know what I mean? So for myself, I had to get to that point of saying, okay, I had to give it over.
Right.
And that's where the struggle is, I think, sometimes, is giving it over to God to release yourself from the hurt, because you feel like, well, if I release myself from the hurt, that means that person doesn't even, but they never felt it from the beginning.
Exactly.
And it's like getting that realization of
Right.
they never knew from the beginning. So it's, that's what I just wanted to say.
And that is so good, because that release that she's talking about is not just a release from the hurt and the pain that I feel, but it's me releasing what I somehow feel is going to be, I'm going to get an opportunity to get even somewhere, right? Brother Mears got his hand up. When I release that opportunity to get even, and I now, like you said, I never was going to have a say in how they were punished for what they did in the first place. But somehow I feel like I'm going to. And releasing that into God's hands is me saying, God, it's out of my control. And there's a huge element to that. Brother Mears.
A small donation to Wikipedia is worth your investment if you would consider contributing. Forgiveness in a psychological sense is the intentional and voluntary process by which one who may have felt initially wronged, victimized, harmed, or hurt goes through a process in changing feelings.
Right.
I was raised
right.
by a mother
Right.
who my entire life, she carried a lot of deep anger, resentment, all kind of hang-ups.
Right.
Some of it from her youth.
Sure.
Because her mother carried these things. And of course, if you're a Holy Ghost filled, Spirit filled person, we understand these are spirits.
Right.
But they can be transferred through the bloodline. And her mother didn't have the Holy Ghost. And she wasn't able to turn loose of these things until she got the Holy Ghost. Unfortunately, it was way up when she was in her probably 60s. All right. I carried some of these things into my youth. My wife will tell you I was a hard man to deal with. Greg will tell you I was a hard man to deal with. Even after I got into the church.
Right.
Because I was dealing with all of these things. But we have to choose.
There it is.
To forgive.
That's it.
We have to choose to turn them loose. And it takes a lot of prayer.
Right.
It takes a lot of agonizing with these things. And
Sometimes,
you have to
absolutely.
finally get to the place that you say, okay, God, I just can't carry this burden anymore.
Right. Absolutely.
And so you just have to lay it down.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Brother Paul.
Thank you. So the way that I view this for me, and I hope this is helpful to somebody else, is when you are hurt, it's a wound, of course. It's not one we can see, but it's still there. And when you are wounded in the physical sense, that wound will not heal properly until you clean it. And
Absolutely.
so in order to clean it, you have to find it. And then you have to know what it is, how deep it is. Is it safe for you to clean it on your own? Do you need medical help? Do you need stitches to close it up again?
Right.
And so for me, forgiveness is the same way.
Right.
When I've been hurt in the emotional sense, I can't heal
Right.
until I've applied the cleaning agent of forgiveness.
Absolutely.
And of course, that's sometimes painful,
Oh, yeah.
just like it's in the physical sense. So that's my little thought for today.
Absolutely. 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 And I want us to, in this last 7 or 8 minutes here, I want us to turn it. We're going to go to question number 4, which is sharing an experience where forgiving someone opened doors for reconciliation. And I want you to understand, sometimes it's not reconciliation of the relationship with that person. Reconciliation comes in different forms and fashions, because let's not lose the point that in all of this discussion of forgiveness, the goal is that we are forgiving because we have been forgiven, and therefore through that forgiveness we are displaying the character and the light and the elements of who He is in us. And so the ultimate goal of forgiveness is for that forgiveness to be a witness to somebody else of the change that has taken place in us, of what He's done in us, right? So when we look at forgiving someone, Brother Rick, can you share an experience where forgiving someone opened doors for reconciliation?
Excuse me. When I was looking at this, I couldn't, I don't know, it was hard for me to dig up something for myself specifically, but it's something that I felt like God has been dealing with me. The story of David in 1 Samuel 24:3 came to mind. And it's basically when Saul's out trying to kill David. David and his men are hiding in caves.
Right.
And Saul goes in the cave where David is at to go relieve himself. And all of his men are saying like, hey, God has delivered your enemy.
Right.
And everybody is on board saying like, hey, here's your moment.
Right. This is the time. Yeah.
This is the time. Take him out. And David's response, I mean, he cuts a piece of his garment off, but his response is that I'm not going to touch him.
Right.
And I think just that in itself speaks volumes of, regardless of what everybody else is saying, the temptation, and everybody's saying like, hey, you are justified. You can get him and you should get him.
Right.
And David turns it over to God, and says, I won't touch him. And then he confronts Saul on it,
right,
labeling, calling him out on what's going on, and also questioning his motives about why are you doing this? What have I done? So,
right.
So he opens up the doors for Saul to speak out and, come to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
And David is basically replying like, hey, even though you're coming after me, let God judge between you and me. So there, David is acknowledging it. He's speaking his truth. He's speaking his peace. And whether Saul recognizes it or not, David is still calling it out and trusting in God.
Right.
To say that, like, I'm going to trust that God is a better judge than I am. Because if I take action, then I'm the one pressing judgment.
Right.
But if I leave it to God, then I'm, letting God take it. And I think in that is where there was a release, because I think a lot of times forgiveness is potentially not being heard or acknowledged. And, and it's really troublesome when you're trying to forgive somebody, if they don't have the same values or beliefs, and they stand justified in their own mind about what has happened.
Right.
So I think a lot of what the story reflects is what is being said of, praying, acknowledging, but also giving it to God.
Well, and I love the point that you brought out, because I don't know that I've never looked at it this way, but truly, the true test of whether or not I've forgiven is when the opportunity for retribution arises and I choose not to take it. Right? I'm not talking about somebody cuts you off in traffic and you have a chance to cut them off and you don't. I ain't what I'm talking about. Somebody hurts you and you have the opportunity, no matter how long later it is, you say, oh, I've forgiven. Well, the opportunity arises for you to make sure they get what's coming to them. How do you respond to that? Because the thing that leaps out at me about that story is not only did David spare Saul, but David repented that he even cut off the portion of Saul's garment because he recognized that this was still God's anointed. This was still the king of Israel, and retribution, even in the slightest form, even to say, now you see what I could have done. David felt remorse and was repentant over that, right? What do you think on, you need to pass on that one? Okay. Okay.
Because of the story I was going to tell, we're live streaming, even though that person lives in a different place.
Okay.
They would know it was them.
All right. I've got somebody right back here. Go ahead, sis.
There was a friendship I had for a very long time. And when everything blew up, it was very hard to forgive. And not just this other person, but myself as well, because when it blew up, it brought to light some things that maybe other people saw, but I did not see in myself. And when I was finally able to say, I am sorry, I was able to forgive myself as well and reconcile with myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think we can't miss that element. Yes. That releasing ourselves in these instances is just as important as releasing the other party. Because otherwise you're carrying around a burden that was never intended for you to carry. And you talk about frustrating. Stop carrying somebody else's baggage. Yes, ma'am.
In carrying that unforgiveness, like Brother Mears was talking about, it can carry on. You can pass it on to your children.
Sure.
And it can be the unforgiveness. It can be the fear.
Right.
But whatever's going on with you,
right,
when your children are young, they're going to get something out of it,
right,
whether you want them to or not.
Absolutely.
But I had struggles with my mother to the most of my life, and couple different kinds of abuse there. But Mike will tell you, at one point he told me, that's it, you're not going home to visit anymore. And I didn't go home for a year because it was so bad, until I could start making changes.
Right.
But when my parents needed me, I was there, and during that time I was able to work through things with myself. And I never outright said to her face, I forgive you, but working through those things and being there for her and my father, and being for her after my father passed away, helped me work through that forgiveness.
Right.
But it not only that, because she would ask me questions like, was I ever a good mother? It helped me to remember good times, and now I have those to hang on to, because when things happen, it is so much easier to remember bad things that happen than it is to remember good things. They have a much more,
the lion
stronger,
in the bush.
they have a stronger influence on you. And being able to let go of those bad times, and I still remember them, but being able to let go of them more and pull up those good times, those things she did actually try to do.
Absolutely.
Because she didn't learn how to be a mother.
Right.
She went through things of her own, like Brother Meir said.
Right.
It was a generational thing.
Right.
And so working through that forgiveness, it not only helped with dealing with my mother, but I think it helped reflect to my family and everything that if I can let go of those years of stuff,
right,
and move on and be there for my parents when they needed me, then that can help them move on, and it helps me deal with other people.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to cut you off, but we're over time and our kids are getting ready to come back over. Let me just tie this in, and this will be the last thing. And I know there were some other folks, and we'll try to get to you next week. But the thing to remember in all of this is the point of forgiveness is reflecting the light of Christ so that others can see the change that has happened in us. In just the same way that it's been pointed out that unforgiveness can be passed on to those that you are bringing up, especially children, because it's not as much that it's a spiritual thing being passed to them as much as it is they are seeing the way that mom and dad handle issues, and they handle issues in the same way, all right? It can't be do as I say and not as I do. They will do as you do. And so the beautiful part about that is when we choose to forgive, those who we are training, those who we are bringing along, those who we are discipling, will also choose to forgive because that is the process that we have played out in front of them. Let's just lift our hands and thank